Mm-hmm. That's what it has us doing. And there's cherry brandy. Messages in the music, so we're gonna let this run as we wait and see who else may join us. When you're feeling lonely and you got no friends, where you go when you run out of places and the walls of your dreams come crashing in? What do you do when you lose all your vices and your only toys is cracking in? Who wants to know that your life is a crisis, cause you're paying the prices for living in sin? Nobody wants to know if you're feeling down in the dump. You climb all the way up to the top floor, but you can't even get up the bus to jump. No, cherry brandy, come real, real handy. Vodka, wine, and whiskey. We'll go down for a ride, and if I get lucky, maybe I'll make it to 70, but happy still ain't no friend of mine. Yes, happy right now. Right now, happy is not a friend of mine. No, it's not. As you know, I have become crystal clear and aware of what has been happening to me and my family. And my family, I finally figured it out. Let's see. Am I looking at here? All right, still just me. Yeah, however, I did figure it out. What was happening to me and my family. And it was this thing called gaslighting. And that's tonight's topic. I just wanted to come on real quick. I had to process this for myself. And just for the record, you know who I am. I am Sis Abena Africa, the traumatized traumatologist and communications coach. And I am a recovering African who is culturally enslaved here in America. And I am a representative from the voices in the margins, true to the cause of African liberation via unification and utilizing the tool of healthy and effective communications. And I come standing on and bringing with me and offering a revolutionary 12-step self-help program that has been uniquely designed with you and me, the African, in mind. Designed to support our healing and recovering from traumatic stress of the human intentional type.
Really, no matter who president is.
Oh my goodness.
You see there.
And that, yeah, and then Alexa heard me say traumatic stress of the human intentional type, and Fox News pops on. I wonder what the connection may be there, right? However, racism non-anonymous, because racism certainly in the lives of Black folks and this Black person is not a secret. And I have been in a process of recovery, reclaiming my culture. More importantly, I've been in the process of reclaiming my voice. And that is when we bring it down here to the individual levels of life. You know, we experience racism that comes from the top. I'm looking for my marker, which I don't think will show very well. So I'm going to pause on that and just use my little hand gestures. Societal level, down to the community, down to the family, and down to us individuals. And when we stop breathing and we leave this body
we return to the spirit realm from which we came, right? So as we grow up in life, the first level when we look up is family. And our first and early experiences are with family. And we learn who we are from our families, what they teach us, our mamas, daddies, aunties, grandparents, siblings, even, right? That's who we learn from. And what I have become very much aware of is this thing called gaslighting. So that's the topic again. And let me let's just start with first a brief description of what gaslighting is. And I'm going to tell you, a story of what triggered this for me, what happened for me that brought me to this point today. Well, a couple of days ago. Last week at some point I began to recognize this is gaslighting. I have been gaslit. So what is gaslighting first and foremost, right? I believe it's probably similar to what people talk about narcissists in their families. However, gaslighting is another thing. Gaslighting it's a psychological manipulation of, or rather tactic. So yeah, I'm reading my notes just so that I can kind of stay focused, because as a traumatologist, when I start thinking about or hear a word that's going to trigger a part of me to come up and speak, we have several parts. I have several parts. I'm traumatized. And I have, anyway, I'm aware. And because I've been aware, I know the appropriate actions to take in order to, manage my trauma and trauma responses to shit, right? So gaslighting is a psychological manipulation tactic, and it's designed to make a person doubt their own perceptions, their own memories, and their own reality. The term originates from the 1944 film or movie called Gaslight, where a husband systematically convinced his wife that she was losing her mind. And he did this by manipulating her environment and then denying, that he did it. I just saw the book was right there. I was reading my book. It was there. No, I never saw that book. And he took that damn book and put it in another place and then denied it because he tried to fucking with her head. And we know people screw with our heads all the time. They like to fuck with you. Like, and so that, that's when you may be, somebody might just lit a gaslight on you. When you have it, like, wait a minute, that just, no. But you begin to question your reality and your perceptions when you are being gaslit. At its core, what I learned, because I had to go look it up. I went and researched last week after, again, it happened. Went in contact with my family members. And anyway, so I had to go look it up. Like, what the, like, let me go look a little closer. I've heard it. I know what it was like. I know what it was about. And however, I had not focused. So this is my focal point now. It says, and I learned, at its core, gaslighting is about control. It's a form of emotional abuse that typically distorts your reality in order to maintain power over someone else. It can happen in personal relationships, workplace relationships, and in entire communities. And I can even say in my work as a clinician, as a therapist, as a coach, in working with folks, I have heard people's experiences with being gaslit. And I did have a client when I'm like, this, as I listened to his story, it's like, this sounds like the whole community in this office is involved in this gaslighting. And it makes sense too, because people like to pick a scapegoat, There's always a scapegoat in the family, someone who's carrying the burden of the family. Now, it would have been useful maybe even to do a quick search on the definition, just for clarity's sake, right, of scapegoating. Now, that is a term that I studied before and looked into and recognized, that in my family, I was the scapegoat. I carried shit. So, as I looked at the definition and began to recognize and make the connections to my experiences, it's like, that's what it was. I was being gaslit all along. And this has been happening for over a course of 30 years. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more what prompted me to look it up in a minute. But before I do that, as I've been thinking about it and reflecting and processing and trying to figure out, like, when did this behavior become so prominent in our communities and in our families and in our lives? This thing called gaslighting, because in the 60s and 70s, it was not a term familiar, even though it came out in 1940s with that movie. I may have seen that movie. We may have seen it. I would have been a kid and not understood the dynamics of adult life per se. And I have a vague sense of seeing that movie at some point. Yet we didn't talk about it in our communities and in our homes. The movie back in 1944, of course, the actors were Caucasian, so that was what Caucasian people did. We didn't do that in our communities, at least that was my experience. Not even knowing how necessarily we children, we in the Black community, we in our families and homes were doing the same thing. And I'm going to tell you in a bit why. And it's like, I see. And it makes sense. So first, though, I began to think about and see how and when this started to spread. I'm like, well, where did we get this from? And me, I'm always like, with a question like that, it's like, look up, where did this shit come from? Hey, shit come from up heaven, right? Come down. Where's it coming from? And I'm like, wow, gaslighting has very deep historical roots in our communities. It didn't just appear, it has been systematically used against Black folks for generations. This tactic of gaslighting. First, during our enslavement and the period of segregation, Black people were constantly told that the oppression, the brutality, the injustices, all the shit we experienced, it wasn't real, wasn't that bad. It was it's intentional to keep us powerless. Anytime we talk about or think about our history with enslavement and what happened to us, oh, stop playing the victim. Oh, it was in the past. Oh, well, that's really over with. It wasn't that bad. Have you heard stuff like that? Though that's an example of gaslighting, and that's where it originates from in American culture. Even look, during active enslavement, as they did what they did to Black bodies, it was always minimized, it was always marginalized, and it was always pushed aside. There was no thought or concern. It was all about, it was slavery in and of itself is all about control, power and control, exercising power and control over another human being, another person. And or with European culture, they want power and control over everything, all of the world resources. It's about power and control. And as I talk about and teach as well, the primary disease in this society, addiction is European control, Europeans' addiction to power and control. That's the primary addiction that formed this society called the USA, United States, the United Snakes, as the folks have said, yet that it's founded on. America has been founded upon these tactics, and it's all about power control. We understand and we know about MK Ultra, which look at that, was taking place during the 1940s. So yeah, Satan always tells you, he has to tell you what he's doing or going to do. You invite him in, and when we turn on the TV, we invite him in, and then he tells us what he's doing, what his plans are, and all that shit. So yeah, in the 1940s, in the early 1940s, is also the time when Americans, folks, were practicing mind control shit on people with MK, with drugs and other stuff. How to mind manipulate people to get them to do what you wanted them to do. In the workplace, black professionals have often raised concerns about racism or the microaggressions. And when we do, it's always dismissed as you being too sensitive, or that you're just imagining things. Oh, what do you know? Oh my Lord, help us sitting in around the rooms in the behavior as a professional in the mental health field. It's my arena. However, I'm sure and know that it happens across all arenas on every plantation station you go, whether it's in economic, mental health, medicine, law, education, war. It's the same shit. So me, I'm in the mental health, and I'm listening and looking like, what? Yes, white folks would have this great tendency to, in a meeting, and there's a question or something that the team is exploring together and planning for, and you raise it, you put out, hey, what about blah, 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 this is what I think of blah, blah, blah. And everybody just like, okay, yeah. And they just kind of brush over it. And then Miss Sue next to you raises her hand and says the same damn thing in some different words, yet the same thing. And almost damn near word for word, just like Melania did with, what is that? Something, it's some food, I'm told. Melania took Michelle's whole speech, plagiarized the whole damn thing. It's good for plagiarizing. That's just American culture and European shit. Racism, white supreme lunacy is what I've always said. That this their culture. It's a cultural thing. It's their way of doing shit. It's like what you can do, right? So in the workplace, it takes place. This gaslighting, and in families, the way it shows up in families, gaslighting became a survival tool for us, often unintentionally passed down as well. Pete, many elders, is said, due to their own trauma, because our elders, because of their own trauma, if they were sexually abused, when they hear their child say that they've been sexually abused, it's like, no, just dismiss it. It's not that bad. Stop complaining. Don't say nothing. That's just how life is. We don't validate the pain. We don't say, oh, I'm so sorry. Here, let me give you some attention to that pain. We minimize the pain. We marginalize it, and we push it aside. And for us, this practice of gaslighting each other unintentionally, because when I first looked up the definition, it said it's an intentional tool. It's used intentionally to gain power and control and everything, right? However, I'm like, I can't. It was really hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that my family members are intentionally. Now, I'll get into my story in a minute with that, just to break that down a little bit more. However, this generation, when it started for me, it started like 30 years ago or so. And the next generation has followed that lead that was started. And I'm now at a point where I finally like, ding, ding, ding. This is what the fuck going on. What's wrong with these people? Now, I also understand and know some other stuff in mental health, emotional health, behavioral health, and why people talk and treat me the way they do and treat each other, and what we do in our family and what happened I know what happened in my family. And I know that my family don't want to know. They don't want to know. They want to hear it. It's hard. So it becomes a defensive way of protecting the self from hearing, remembering painful shit. And for us as a people, we certainly had to develop survival skills and tools to minimize what massa was doing and what white people are saying and doing, and or how you got hurt. You got to get up, you got to keep moving. You don't say nothing, you don't talk about it, you just forget it. And or you did what a whole lot of us in our communities did too. And it's like my grandma told my mom when my mom was hurting really bad for some shit that happened. And her mom just said, here, take a drink, take this, it'll make you feel better. It will make you feel better. So we take alcohol to numb the pain. We drink, we smoke, we drug to numb the pain. Addiction is a disease of the feeling. So this all goes together. It's like, I see now. But I had not saw this thing called gaslighting, even though I knew when I came out away from my sister's home when there was a family gathering. I came away from any family gathering, not just her home. Anywhere we all got together as family, it happened. And I would come home feeling like a really low piece of shit, just like a little roach. And that's just a sit. You have a deep, you're not really sure what the fuck was wrong. That happened. And or you're just frustrated because, I just, anytime I open my mouth, I could say 3 words before somebody cutting me off and discounting me and marginalizing me and telling me I don't know everything and all this shit. Like, what is this? It's gaslighting. It's gaslighting. Because family members will do that, even unintentionally. Just to hide and to validate their own pain. They don't want to see themselves. And this is something I talk about and teach all the time. The challenge that people have with seeing themselves. So that's why, my business and my practice is third eye insight. Third eye insight. That eye up there. I did 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. First, third. First or third, either way you look at it. That inside, that eye that looks inside. Insight. The eye that looks inside. The 2 eyes look out. The third one looks in. The first one looks in. The other 2 look out. Either way, same thing, right? And then we catch it from the media, societal level. Always shit blows down. It starts at the societal level. Well, or we could say from spiritual, but in this realm where we're breathing and connecting and interacting with other folks who are in this realm called planet Earth, everything takes place in our individual lives, in our family, community, and the broader society. That's where the action and shit slung around. So the media and the society, the way that they erase our story, Black history, the way they demonize Black leaders, the way they have even demonized our culture. And culture and spiritual practices and beliefs are pretty synonymous, really. They really go together. And certainly, at least for us, they did before we got dumped with all this shit. And this shit is the traumatic stress of the human intentional type. And examples of traumatic stress of the human intentional type include kidnapping, rape, physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, all of that, holding hostage, right? And all of these are, and how history is rewritten, is said, of the narratives, our stories, and the lies that have been told, all of the stories of that support white supremacy. All of these are societal forms of gaslighting. So we live with this on a pretty daily basis. It's ingrained in all our communities. It often as a means of survival, and it's time to break the cycle, right? So here's the thing that triggered this for me, right? Let me put this in this context and framework. Let's see. I wrote my story out, so I'm searching for how I'm going to deal with. Now I want to say this example. We know gaslighting first is one of the hardest things to recognize when it comes from our family members. Why? Because we expect love and support. So it's really hard to see in our family members when it's happening, when we are being gaslit. However, there are times love and support come with unspoken conditions, right? Conditions that require us to stay silent from the truth in order to keep the peace. All the time in my work, people struggle with saying what they are thinking and feeling because they don't want to hurt the other person. They don't want the other person to think something, fill in the blank. And so we stay silent about our truth just to keep the peace, because I don't want to, it's going to lead to a fight. So I don't say nothing. Because typically, and just for the record, this thing called slavery, don't think, don't feel, just do what I need you to do, is the hallmark of slavery. Alexa, play my Pandora. I need my
Maccabee Radio from Pandora.
We need to put some.
Let's go.
Love it bad, me do. So I need that energy around me, especially as I begin to think about and talk about this example and the trigger, right, that caused me to open up with this. And I'm probably going to stay in this vein of talking about gaslighting and how it affects us, how it affected me, and how I came to know, and the steps I'm taking to break that cycle and get out from under the fire and stay out from under the fire, right? So where I was is just talking about and recognizing, the challenge that it is to see gaslighting in our family, and even more importantly, it's challenging for them to see it in themselves. And that becomes a huge problem, because if a person doesn't see their shit, they're not willing to look at their shit, then all the shit is dumped on you. Because only if you're putting out and you're open and willing to expose your shit and they're not, they can stand back and always looking at you and point the finger at you and never look at themselves. So, and more often than not, because this gaslighting is a defense mechanism, it's a way of them protecting their spirit and their mind from the memory. They don't want to hear. They don't want the honesty. It hurts. The truth hurts, right? So here's a story and how I realized just how deep gaslighting runs in my family. So I've talked about a little before. Hopefully this is a bit more succinct. My sister, who is now deceased, made her transition in 2017, was it? Had a long history of dismissing my experiences. Rewriting history. Yeah, she rewrote history to the family in terms of me in that sense. And however, I always felt with her that my reality wasn't valid. Well, I won't even say it like that. She was a gaslighter. She gaslit. like I said, I would come away from contact with family, particularly with her, um, and feel like just I got stepped on. It was difficult to talk. I couldn't really talk. I was always marginalized. My voice was silenced. She was my eldest sister. We grew up in the 60s, so I had a level of respect for elders. And when someone said, I don't want to hear what you're saying, no, that's not important, I'm just going to shut down. I grew up in a family when people had conflict or verbal disagreements. It typically led to a lot of fighting cops and shit. So I learned early in life to just tone it down because I didn't want the conflict. I conflict avoided. I worked to avoid conflict. She was the elder and she was, had her issues that she had with me and about me and why. I understand she did what she did, yet that's not the thing. She did it, and this is what it was. I didn't understand it though. Well, I understood it in a different way. I didn't understand it as gaslighting. I understood it as jealousy, real jealousy. Help me see the difference between envy and jealousy, because jealousy is more of an action when you envy what somebody has, and that's how I always viewed it. And then you talk about that person with others so as to put them down, so that people will also dismiss them and marginalize them, ignore them, and not see them, and they will focus on you instead. And that was the dynamic in my family with my eldest sister, and in our early adult life. It became that, in our childhood life, we had our trauma story, and that's, a trauma story, and what it developed, so after experiencing trauma and wounds, or growing up, we all develop defense mechanisms. We develop ways to protect ourself. So clearly, she had a need to protect herself from something that was triggered when I was around, and for her. So what I noticed this week, though, because she's deceased and she had 5 children and a couple of her oldest children, and I reached out to, and it's like, bam, it was the same thing. I express something that I'm feeling, and I get slammed with a whole litany of accusations of what's wrong with me, what I'm doing wrong, how I'm doing it wrong. And it's like, here we go again. And that's when it hit me. It's like, this is gaslighting. And I looked it up. Like, this what it is. I've been being gaslit like a mofo. And then, I had a couple of interactions in the past couple of days, and I'm like, bam, it's crystal clear. And then when I did the research, it made it even more clear, right? So now I understand what has actually been happening to me and my family. The gaslighting. And people do it all the time. People do it all the time. I'm not we all. I don't. I really don't. Because I'm open. I'm an honest. I'm practicing a program of recovery. I developed a program of recovery. Any 12-step program of recovery teaches you honesty is first. You have to be ready to get gut honest with yourself. Look at yourself and get honest about yourself and your shit. Recovery is not possible if you're not willing to see the truth. And my truth is my truth, and I'm no longer willing to, let it go. Because look, every time I bring up things that happen, real events, real harm, there's always a pushback. And then here's the other piece to that's I said in here. Victims, whenever there's a victim, that's how this whole cult societal system is set up. The victim is always in a position to prove that a perpetrator harmed them, even though, because in your harm is marginalized, it's minimized, we don't want to hear it. At any rate, that's just how the system is set up. And that's another way, this gaslighting takes place. Seem like the whole damn legal system is set up for gaslighting. or something, not real justice. Um, so I'm in a place where now that I know, because that's how recovery works, awareness, acceptance, and then action. I've been aware for years that, some shit was wrong, and I took action. And as a result, it just led to whatever. I'll get to that. I'm coming down to the next thing. So I'm no longer willing to take it. I refuse to accept being gaslit just because my truth makes other people uncomfortable. My experience is real, and my healing requires that I acknowledge it fully. Even others can't or won't. Right? And that's also consistent with what traumatologists teach. Remembering and telling the truth about terrible events are both prerequisites to doing two things: restoring social order and healing individual victims. As an individual victim, in order for me to heal myself, I have to be free to express and share my truth. This is my truth of what my experiences was with my sister, and I understand why she did what she did, what happened. I understand what happened to her, and I understand it was a protective factor for herself. That was her way of protecting herself. And however, what it does do and how it will operate in families and relationships, we all have our own defense mechanisms. And, those defense mechanisms is what keeps families and individuals apart, because people are, are defended. And you say something, like, what you say? What you do? Don't do that to me. Defense, always like, because we have been in a state of what? External danger from people outside of us. And so we've developed these ways, and we're very cautious, and we're very, we've been taught that we ain't shit, so we don't feel like shit. And when we look at somebody else, we feel bad, and so we hide ourselves. And it's how our psychological world works. Our mental and emotional world works. And so what happens again in relationships when is one person has more control or influence in families, it manifests like this. So like I said, my sister, she was older than me, so she had more control. So that was a dynamic for me, and that was our lifestyle in the 60s and 70s. That's what we grew up with in terms of respecting those older than us and listening to, the elders. Yeah, she was, she babysat us. She was the oldest. I remember her babysitting us up until probably I was about 8 or 9. And then I and my next sister became babysitters for the family members because that sister was a couple of years older. At any rate, what happens, and this is how you may see it in your families, Let me see, how long have I already gone? 30 minutes. Let me get through this. There's this denial of past events. It never happened. You're making things up, or you're being dramatic. And how many black families, we don't talk about the things that happened in our childhood. And when one family member brings up something that happened, and another one says, "No, that didn't. That never happened. What you talking about? Why are you being too dramatic? That's over. That's in the past. Why are you even talking about that?" There's the minimization of pain. You're too sensitive. Oh, you overreact. It's not that deep. It ain't that serious. These are things that people say. And I was like, wow, I've heard all these things in my family, right? And I've heard, and at points in my life, you talk about somebody else. Yeah, that one, yeah, they so sensitive. Or this, they that, they this, they that. We always describe and define in other people's reality, right? Then there's the retelling of the story, the rewriting of the narrative, where families, they come up with a whole new story about themselves as they're the victim, despite evidence to the contrary. Yeah, so rewriting the narrative. Um, I've heard and seen this tactic in families that I've worked with. Um, and in my family, well, this is the thing. They come, somebody hit you, and you see them, and you look at us. I saw you do it, and they'll rewrite. No, you did this to me. I didn't. And they will rewrite the narrative in a heartbeat, and to make it look like they are the ones who've been hurt, when in fact the evidence is right here. But they will still hold on to the story. Mm-mm. It wasn't me. You did it because this, and that. Because of this, and that you did, that's why that happened. Not because I didn't do it. And the ultimate one, this is the one I've talked about in other platforms and stuff, the blaming the victim business. Blaming the victim, and this is what I see in the whole criminal justice system. It blames the victim. The victim is held accountable to a certain amount of time they have to prove that the perpetrator did what they did. Even though the perpetrator had the smoking gun in his damn hand, all you have to say, I didn't do it. And then there's a whole system that gets started up. For the victim to get justice, they have to pay to prove that this person did what they did, that they hurt. So when you confront somebody about their hurtful behavior, they turn it around and make you the problem. And that's what happened to me this week. That was the one. And that's the one that I would always get more often than not with my family. Later in life, and earlier, so you say, well, that really hurt. And then the next thing you know, I'm the problem. And that just I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing this. This could really stop. So, as we know, in personal relationships, gaslighting can be more extreme. It often happens in abusive relationships because, abuse in a partner relationship is all about power and control, right? And so it could be much more dangerous, especially where the abuser wants to keep their partner dependent and confused. In really domestically violent family situations where the one partner, typically the male, will isolate the woman from all of her family and friends, cut those connections off because they need total power and control. And that's very abusive, and it's gaslighting, because they deny the person's reality. Well, it seems like you're doing this. No, it's not because of that. No. Or they're very mean and spiteful with it, right? So the next point is just if we take a minute and think about, why is it usually so hard to recognize? It's especially when the people who are doing it don't see it. Why is it so hard for people to see themselves and recognize this dynamic? Well, first, it's like gaslighting, just like the disease of addiction, is insidious because it works in shadows. You don't see it happening. You don't see the progression of the alcoholism or the drug addiction. It's in the shadows, so to speak. And it's insidious in that regard. Many people gaslight without even realizing it. And this is what I also recognized in my family situation and in the dynamics. I'm like, I think they really don't see this. There's aspects of it that they kind of know, yet they have a really hard time hearing me because for the last 30 years, I allowed myself to be silenced. I shut down. And I never said anything. Really, I never spoke back out. In that regard. So they don't even recognize, I think, that they do it and how it shows up. It's simply that they were just raised on how they were taught to navigate conflict. And this is how they were taught because this is how their mom navigated the dynamic relationships with us, with me, myself, and for herself. I suppose other people, I'm sure, felt stuff, or we all have two parts, a good side, and we got our sugar, we got our shit. Everybody has their sugar and their shit. People, some shit show up more than others, and that's typically people who are really deeply hurt. They have a lot of deep emotional wounds, that shit. And when you have a lot of deep emotional wounds, you tend to develop very strong defenses to protect that child inside you who got hurt. So, children don't recognize, they live what they learn, and we learn from our parents. We watch how they deal with shit. We watch how they talk to this one or that one, and they mirror it, right? And they don't realize that what they're saying, that it's actually gaslighting some damn body, right? So, and some of the reasons it's often done by loved ones, and we don't expect our own family to manipulate us, so we excuse their behaviors, and which is why for me it went on for 30 or some odd years. In the beginning, it's like they don't, no, it can't be that. They don't. It's something else going on. We give compassion and grace to other folks all the time, and we don't apply it to self. And that is a form of, and I see a form and a way of giving a person grace and allowing this addiction, this disease to progress. Because I'm seeing gaslighting as it's an illness, it's a disease, so to speak, because it really damages and destroys relationships in our communities. And because we cannot talk about shit after it happened, we want to sweep it under the rug and then just let some time pass and ignore it and come back as if nothing happened, and never talk about what happened. Me, I'm always one. I'm about growth and change, so we gotta clean this shit up. What happened? And let's talk about that, because that shit really hurt. Oh, here you go again with all that. You're so negative. It's like, now is gaslighting. That's gaslighting, people. It happens gradually too, because it took me all this time to finally really realize it was time before it really hit me. It's gradual. It builds over time, and it makes it harder to pinpoint when it actually started, right? It plays on your insecurities. So if you already struggle with self-doubt, gaslighting reinforces those fears. Now, of course, we know that as a people, we have historical self-doubt. We have been told shit about ourselves and mistreated for over 400 years. So across the generations, this is where we are at this point, where now, even when we point it out and people understand pieces of what you're saying, they just automatically go on the default. We're in this cancel culture community and time period where we just can dismiss somebody. People are actually very numb. And another one of my nieces, in a talk we had, pointed that out, and I'm like, wow, yeah, the numbing effect. So we're numb to each other's feelings anymore, and we're numb to ourselves. And as a people, our struggle with fighting the messages we've received, that we get in this society and work on TV about how black people this and black people that, and you ain't smart enough and you don't have this, and all of that is something that we struggle with, and gaslighting keeps it going. And they started it, that fire, and yet the ultimate for me is the fact that it is a defense mechanism. And if a person is using a defense mechanism, then I understand they are hurting and they're protecting themselves from something. Something is inside that they are not ready, able, or willing to share. And it's a defense. And sometimes, as they say, gaslighters are not malicious. They deny painful truths because they can't face them. Now, when I talk about my pain with my family, it's hard for them to face that because they're my family members, and who wants to, I know that they don't want to see themselves as being hurtful to me. And they can't, it's hard to hear, well, what you're doing is hurtful. Just like any parent, a mother, and I've worked in, in child welfare, mothers, I know, it's really difficult for them to acknowledge that in the process of raising their child, they were doing the best they could and what they thought were the best. And they may not realize and didn't realize that they were actually hurting their child. And later, when they find that out, it's very difficult for them to accept, to own, damn, yeah, I really was hurting my child and I never knew. You don't know until you know stuff. And so that's really hard for me to call a family member out on doing something that was really hurtful. It's like, why would I hurt you? What's wrong with you? I would never do that. I'm just saying, this is what I experienced. And then you were left to go and question your own reality. And you're left to go and say, well, let me look at it. Well, I see what they mean. So, yeah, maybe I need to apologize and I did something wrong. And I'm like, no, this is not okay. Why? Because of the emotional and psychological toll that it has on a person. It can have severe consequences on a person's mental health, right? How so? Anxiety and depression. Because when you are constantly put in a position to question yourself, it's going to lead to chronic stress. If your mind is always looking at what's wrong with me, there's something wrong with me, I need to do this, I did this bad. And that's usually typically what people come into the therapy room to deal with and to talk about. This chronic anxiety and depression, these negative thoughts about themselves because somebody else said it about them, right? The loss of self-trust. You begin to question yourself. You begin to doubt your own thoughts. And it makes it difficult for you to make decisions. Then there's the isolation. That I was good for the isolation. Many victims, they say, we withdraw from relationships. Why? Out of fear of being not only manipulated, yet being gaslit. The fear of being hurt again. How about that? Just that. If I go, then this is likely to happen, so I'm just going to stay away. When I go, this is what's said to me all the time, so I'll stay away. I won't go. I'll just isolate myself. Because it's dangerous and it's hurtful in that space. So you begin to isolate. And it leads to emotional exhaustion. It's exhausting to be constantly trying to think about what I can do, how I could do it, what I need to change in order for that person to not respond to me in that way. Constantly. And that energy, that's a lot of mental energy when you're trying to think about that and you have a quote unquote a life, a job, a partner, a child, other responsibilities, then having to spend, this constantly defending yourself with somebody else. So, it cut for me when it happens within families, it does cause this generational damage because I had to pull myself away. I did that some 20 some odd years ago, 25 years. And now that my sister has passed and I work to have a relationship with the children, however, I'm seeing the generational damage that has been done from the gaslighting. They have a difficult time and they cannot hear me talk about my experiences because it's their mom. And who wants to think about their mom doing something that was hurtful to somebody else? So they're going to defend her, which in turn just keeps the ball of gaslighting kind of rolling, because then I'm put on the hot seat for doing something wrong, for talking about my mom who is not here to speak for herself, and now you, and this is what's wrong with you. I'm like, okay, damn, never mind. All I did, I asked a question. I felt hurt, and I shared that, and that's what it led to. And it's like, it's exhausting. And I need to pull away. I need to isolate myself. I need to respect where they are. And I'm going to respect myself and where I am. And I'm no longer going to put myself in the position to be hurt, period. And if folks are not able to hear and respect that, then okay, I will have to do what I need to do for me. And that is what has been happening, I hear, in so many of our families, right? Um, the children, they don't know. They, well, kids who grow up being gaslit, you learn to silence your voice. That's what I did, silenced my voice in my family. It can affect your confidence in relationships into adulthood, and it probably has had an impact. Well, I wasn't a child, I was a young adult when the gaslighting really took off. I don't really necessarily recall it so well as a child. Well, some little instances. Yeah, I did. Yeah, one instance. I could have been more than 7 or 8. And yeah, they would say stuff to me, how I was so deep, and people would always say stuff to me about my voice and the things I would say. And I learned to be silent. I learned to silence my voice. And that was a thing. It happened in school, even as children. And to think about it now, that was more the envious and the jealousy in school, where kids would tear up my work. If I went to the bathroom and left it on the desk and come back and they destroyed it, I have to redo it. They called me the teacher's pet, because I was smart. I just was intelligent. I was a smart kid. I liked school and I liked reading and I was good at it. And that brought a lot of shit from other kids, including my family, including my sister, for the recognition that I got with it as a child in the family, coming home with A's and B's all the time. That kind of shit. you know, um, I mean, I'm gonna do a part 2 tomorrow. I'm not gonna keep us. This went for a whole hour because adding my own story and adding more to it, I kind of got a bit off of the full, just a focus. So I'll finish. I'll come back tomorrow and we'll talk some more about some strategies I have to help begin to break that cycle. If you are able to identify with anything that I've shared thus far about this thing called gaslighting, have you had that experience? Who? There's always been at least one in the family who has had this experience and is likely to be struggling with dealing with family. And you have to struggle to do, like, do I want to cut them off for life because it's about where it's been, and or how to repair and how to interact with a loved one who also gaslights, and they're not ready, able, or willing to look at themselves and hear and not look at you in a way which honors your experience. They don't question your experience and discount your experience and tell you what's wrong with your thoughts and feelings. Like, it's a challenge, and recovery, however, is possible. So I always say that recovery is possible, and that's where I'm going to leave it for tonight, because it's exhausting to think about this thing called gaslighting and recognize that this is what it is. But drop a comment. Let me know what you think and what's going on for you. And again, we're going to come back tomorrow evening at 9 o'clock, and we're going to talk more about the strategies to break through, and how to enforce them, and some tools to support healing from the damage that you may have incurred, because I know that's where I'm at, and I'm still doing that. I'm in that process. So I hope to see you again soon, and thanks so much for listening to me share.